Thank you, Mr. Howarth. I feel the need to say that I'll be brief and then just talk for as long as possible, just because I wouldn't like to revert to type. I wish to speak specifically to new Clause 100, which is principally in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham. I'd like to start by saying how grateful that both she and I are at the 64 colleagues who have added their name in support of this amendment, and it shows the real strength of feeling and concern in this House on this issue. It has already been mentioned by some of my honourable friends, and I shall go into it in more detail. Despite assurances that we have had from ministers and from the Prime Minister herself, very real concerns remain about the potential impact of leaving the European Union on women's rights and the government's intentions of defending them. This amendment addresses this in 4 key areas. The first one is employment rights and protections derived from EU legislation. We know that the rights of part-time workers, pregnant women at work, and those also the many different cases we have seen about the right to equal pay and equal value that was derived in the EU. The government's white paper argues that we have more generous maternity leave systems here in the UK than is required at EU level, and that is absolutely correct. Yes, we do, and what I would say to the people in this room about why we have that is you're very, very welcome, because it was the Labour government that introduced those things, and it was specifically a mention to the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham and the other women who sit in this chamber with me today who fought for those rights. And those, at the moment, we have something that is better than the EU. However, we have seen through many different global changes in the past few weeks, I was going to say few months, but the last few days, how easily women's rights can be undone when our global alliances begin to fail. I will give way.
I'm grateful to her for giving way and certainly pay tribute for the role Labour has played in those rights. Would she agree, though, too, that actually the EU does take us further in some respects, for example, equal pay for equal value? And also, would she agree that the real risk here is that when that legislation becomes UK domestic legislation, it can be unpicked through secondary legislation, and what we've heard is absolutely no reassurance on that?
Absolutely. I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I agree entirely. I'm going to come on to talk a little bit about what the EU has done and in advance of UK legislation. But we don't need to look any further. I will give way, perhaps shortly. The issue around pregnancy discrimination and the rise of that in the past number of years because of changes in legislation in the UK have meant that women's rights are definitely something that needs to be protected and considered, and I would be very happy if we had an external protection. We know that the rights for part-time workers are crucial for women. This includes pension rights and equal treatment at work for part-time workers. 75% of part-time workers are women. 42% of women work part-time. Equal pay for equal value is crucial for women. This derives from the speech therapist case brought to the European Court of Justice in 1993. This is a very live issue, as low-paid women in the UK are today fighting equal value pay cases against Asda and Reading Council. Today, still, this is still going on. The government's white paper states... I'm just going to have a minor segue. My favourite moment in the government white paper was the bit when it said that Britain does have sovereignty, but it hasn't always felt like it. It reminded me of my children saying, I know you love him more than me, I know you love me too, but it hasn't always felt like it. Anyway, back to women's rights. You know, we really made Britain look like a petulant teen. The government is committed to strengthening the rights when it is the right choice for UK workers, and will continue to seek out opportunities to enhance protections. That's what it says. So what exactly does the right choice mean? When do the ministers in front of me think that strengthening workers' rights is not the right choice? I would also like to remind the House that it is not long since we had the Red Tape Challenge. The Equality Act 2010 was included in the Red Tape Challenge in 2012. So the very rights that the government now say they are committed to, they have previously considered to be red tape. It was the Prime Minister herself who was the minister who led that review. When ministers wonder why we doubt the sincerity of their commitment, let me say this. I have read the White Paper very carefully, much like the team we have on the government front benches going out into the European Union and being part of the Brexit team. There isn't a single mention of a woman nor equality anywhere in the White Paper. I think that it's time for a woman's voice to fill this chamber for today, because I believe the honourable gentleman has had his say. When they are at the negotiating, when the people... I absolutely will be.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She is making a characteristically powerful and passionate and humorous speech with it as well. But I want to also just ask her this point, which is, would it not be fair to also approach the wording in the White Paper with some caution, bearing in mind that prominent Leave campaigners in the Leave campaign argued that leaving the EU would be an opportunity to cut EU social and employment protections?
Jess Phillips.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think that my honourable friend makes a very important point, and the thing that we might get that the Leave campaign said is a squashing of workers' rights. The thing that we won't get is £350 million going into the NHS. If only there was a level of consistency in what we'd been promised. When the ministers on the front bench opposite, I will give way to
for giving way, and I always have enjoyed working on the Women and Equality Select Committee, which has been incredibly harmonious, listening to both men's and women's voices. And I do understand the spirit of New Clause 100. But I do find it faintly objectionable, and I know who I'm addressing this to in that phraseology, about women's and equalities rights when it comes to our Prime Minister, because I think she's led the way in terms of FGM, in terms of making sure that workers in particular areas have better life chances, about coercive control. So can I implore the Honourable Lady to believe that members on this side do believe in the rights of both male and female, and particularly our Prime Minister?
I have absolutely no doubt that people from the opposition benches care about women's rights. I have lots of evidence to suggest that some of them absolutely don't and need, frankly, a good, strong talking to by your Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister. However, I have no doubt, and I'm going to come on to the sections in this bill that are specifically about violence against women, and it is because I know how committed the Prime Minister has been to violence against women issues like FGM and cross-border issues to do with FGM that I cannot understand why she would whip her party not to vote for this. So, anyway, I'll get back to where I was. What I want to know is that when the ministers opposite on the front bench are at the negotiating table, when they are thinking about the competitiveness of the UK economy, what will be high on their list? Will it be how to ensure we protect and enhance workers' rights or women's rights? I mean, I think you've got your answer for you there. Or will it be to undercut our EU neighbours by becoming a low-regulation, low-tax economy? The esteemed High Court Justice Dame Laura Cox said, "Some of the basic rights that we now take for granted, pregnancy and maternity rights, part-time workers' rights, equal pay for equal value, are all at risk if the UK becomes a low-regulation economy." Is that the true destination of these negotiations? Can the Minister give us an assurance that powers in the Great Repeal Bill, great or otherwise, will not be used to remove any equality and employment rights at a later date? Will part-time workers' rights and the rights of pregnant women at work and women fighting for equal pay really be safe with them? Whatever happens, I will give way.
Thank the honourable lady for giving way. She's making a passionate case. But I would put to her that the case that she's making is not really for this bill, it is for the Great Repeal Bill, which is to come in due course.
I can recognise the honourable gentleman's assertions. However, I'm being asked to vote on something tonight, and I want to be certain that people like me and people who live in my constituency are going to be protected. And at the moment, I don't feel confident. No. Just to clarify, I think that there are lots of people waiting, and I think that the honourable gentleman who is trying to intervene has stood on his feet for many minutes during this debate, and I think that it's time for somebody else to have a chance. Absolutely. So, the second thing that concerns me, which we've touched on slightly, was the violence against women and girls. The amendment would not only defend women's rights at work, but also protects those women escaping domestic violence, FGM, or those trafficked across the EU and the UK. My constituency in Birmingham, where in 2010 up to 900 schoolgirls across the city were at risk of FGM, and the key risk ages being at birth, 4 to 6-year-olds, and during puberty. 1 in 5 children in Birmingham will have experienced or seen domestic violence before they reach adulthood. At least 300 forced marriages of women take place in the West Midlands every year. So I ask the Minister, when they are at the negotiating table, who will be in their minds? Will it be the women in my constituency experiencing FGM, or those fleeing their violent partners and using the services such as Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid? In Birmingham, in the last year, 4 women have been murdered, with only another woman found dead last week in my constituency. The European Protection Order ensures that women who have suffered domestic violence are protected from the perpetrators if they travel or move away anywhere in the EU. Predictions about the consequences of Brexit for policing measures will depend on the outcome of these negotiations. On the 4th of February 2016, history was made in Hammersmith Specialist Domestic Abuse Court when the first European Protection Order was imposed in England and Wales. In this case, the survivor had returned to Sweden. A restraining order was granted as well as a European Protection Order so that she is protected in the UK as well as in Sweden. It is generally accepted that the UK will want to continue with certain parts of EU policing, justice and cooperation, and it is essential that the UK countries feel that we can opt in to the EPO agreement following Brexit. The White Paper notably neglects to mention any of this. It doesn't mention FGM, it doesn't mention domestic violence, or indeed violence against women in areas that the government will continue to work with the European partners on. In the area of crime, only organised crime and terrorism are mentioned. And whilst those are incredibly serious things, nobody in this building will be able to find anywhere in the country as many of their constituents affected by those 2 crimes as are affected by this one. Exactly. So will ending violence against women and girls, and in particular in the UK's continued use of the European Protection Order, be a priority for the government during and after the Brexit negotiations? Finally, I'm not doing the penultimate finally, the finally, PS, finally. This new clause would also achieve what the Prime Minister says she wants to achieve, to make the UK a fairer place, and not only protect workers' rights, but build on them. Her words. There are many gaps in our equalities legislation and a need to make our legislative framework fit for the 21st century. Section 14 and Section 106 have been there since the Act was passed in 2010 but have not been commenced. So will the Minister today undertake to establish a cross-departmental, and I put myself on the line and say cross-party, I'll come and help, working group to assess and make recommendations for developing legislation on equality and access to justice? My challenge to the government is, will you take the opportunity that Brexit gives us and make the UK the best place to be a woman, or will it be one of the worst?
Sir Fernandez.